Okay, everybody. Um, welcome to my Friday night live show. I don't see anybody in here yet, so I'll just give it some time here, let people get in. But yeah, I normally do my live shows on Friday at 7 because I feel like that's the best time to do it because people are usually most people are off of work by then and they're settling in, maybe just ate their dinner or eating dinner and I figured that this would probably be the best time for people to catch it, but I guess not tonight. Oh, I got somebody. There's my first person. Welcome, whoever came in. Okay, welcome, everybody. Yeah, I was just saying that I normally do. Hey, Heather. Hey, great to see you. Awesome to see you. I have a really good show planned for tonight. A really good show. I have a lot of things to cover. So basically, what I was going to get to is that yeah, I normally do my live shows on Friday nights at 7 in the evening because most people are usually off of work by then and can catch most of it, if not all of it. So, yeah, I have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. Hey, Roger Dodger, great to see you too. And Salacious Crumb, hey, good to see you. Welcome. But yeah, I have a lot to cover tonight in this live stream. So I'm going to discuss, uh, with my background of the show here, my topics, I'm going to explain all the key factors that play a role in the upcoming internal conflict that we will see in the future. Um, i.e., moral, ethical, and societal decay and rot, also food and fuel shortages, as well as regime overreach and false flags, coupled with economic and financial collapse and societal divisions, and how it'll lead not only to civil unrest and riots, but also to the quietly observing factions, meaning the people in the background that are sitting and quietly observing all the kooky, crazy people. Like in my thumbnail, I put Colonel McGregor from my story. He is the one of the three leaders of the National Salvation Revolutionary Front faction, who is a secular humanist ultra-nationalist faction. They're not fascist, but they're way, way to the right in terms of, fascism is corporatism, to where the government and corporations are in bed together. But actually, they're opposed to that because they see it as part of globalism. So what they want to do is they want to make an ultra-nationalist American state build off the bodies of those that they slaughter that were globalist or globalist oriented, globalist supporters. So basically, the maniacs like that are quietly observing. There's various factions. In a nation as vast as ours, there are various factions observing. It would be naive to think that that's not the case. And I'm going to actually mention some examples a little later. But yeah, like I was saying, the civil unrest and riots will also lead to quietly observing factions and free radicals and lone wolves and others that are lurking and waiting in the shadows with their own beliefs and ideologies. They will come in to fill the power vacuum that's created. So that's one topic. Hey everybody. Hey Jennifer. Hey baby. Who else is here? Let me see. Hey, Into the Fray. Great to see you too. But yeah, that's the first topic. The second topic is I'm going to discuss the limited resources and mixed with deindustrialization and the ramifications of that. Because there's a lot of ramifications of the deindustrialization and limited resources in terms of food, fuel, and more and more. I'm going to also on my next topic after that, I'm going to discuss the dynamics of the woke, depleted ramifications of that. Then I'm going to discuss the role of Psyops in a post Smith Munt USA and why being skeptical of everything is a must. It's a must. Then I'm going to discuss China and Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, and hybrid warfare doctrines and the colossal might of China, but also Russia, too, being the second biggest after China. and how an internal conflict for the final topic would progress while other areas of the world descend into regional conflicts, leading into a very short, fast, and very, very intense World War III, much like my documentaries I've created, which are the playlists and the stories I've written in the community tab, with the playlists being the 96-hour invasion playlist, which is 36 videos long, as well as the Pacific Northwest playlist, which is a 10-video playlist. And then I also have the community tab story review playlist that is a review for the actual stories I typed out that are in the community tab, that are under in my community tab. So what the reviews do is the reviews show you a background and give you very, very important information, sort of like building blocks. I start very basic, and I work my way up into more advanced concepts like basic small unit tactics, both outdoor and indoor, with building assault tactics, and how that would affect things. And I use examples from the stories I wrote as the template for those examples, as well as the logistics and how logistics impact operations, and also nomadism and semi-nomadism, and examples of that in the story, as well as field sanitation and caching away supplies. All very, very, very important aspects in any upcoming foreign invasion, as well as you can apply those also, the same concepts, you can apply that to an internal conflict. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about these things. Let me see who's in here real quick before I get started. Want to greet everybody if I can. I know there's only 6 in here right now, but let me see. Oh, this thing's not showing me. Show me something. Oh, okay. Hey, Okie girl, great to see you. Hey, just me. I haven't seen you in a while. Great to see you. I know you're always talking about your water. That's awesome. Keep getting it. Keep getting it. You'll need it. Yep, there's Salacious Chrome. I seen you, Roger Dodger, and Jennifer, my dear, my love. Okay, now I'm going to get started with discussing the key factors that play a role in the upcoming internal conflict, insofar as the moral, ethical, and societal decay and rot, also the food, fuel shortages, and the regime overreach and false flags. Well, speaking of that, you see an awful lot of that these days. You see the whole Roe versus Wade thing, and they're setting bricks out, and more and more and more. They're talking about all the gun-grabbing nonsense, which I'll also mention in my part about the post-Smith-Munt section, meaning that they can propagandize the American people now. The regime has allowed itself legally to do that to people in this nation. So you see a lot of moral and ethical and societal decay and rot because you see all the woke stuff. You see all the people that don't know which bathroom to use stuff. You see you know what I mean. You know exactly what I mean. And you see all the other aspects like the Roe v. Wade, and there's more, and there's more. There's a lot more. Virtually everything right now that you see in this world, insofar as like the decay and rot, the general disintegration of society, all relates to everything that you're seeing that's coming out in both the alternative media and mainstream media, because the mainstream media stories tend to proliferate and somehow make it into the alternative media where they get passed on down the line. Because what happens is you have a lot of people reading news stories, but they don't ever do the background research to validate if there's incorrect or correct things in them. So they end up getting proliferated into the alt media. But, you know, it is what it is at this point. But anyways, people are seeing this, and you have to look at it through the lens of a much, 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 much larger frame of view, meaning you have to be able to see the forest from the single trees insofar as singular events and how they all tie together. As an amateur analyst and researcher, I'm constantly drawing comparisons, and I'm constantly overlaying information, cross referencing information. I'm doing all of those things, and I'm looking at how these things connect and what type of overall picture they form. You see, when I make my hypothetical documentary series on these types of things, I'm not just coming up with this stuff out of the blue. No, I'm basing everything that I make into a hypothetical, into things, from the real world we live in. And that has to do with the lack of resources. It has to do with the fracturing and disintegration of the country right before our eyes. It has to do with all of that. So when you look at these things, you have to look at them through the frame, through the point of view of seeing that all of these things connect to form a larger picture. And that larger picture is simply this: you have a nation of some nearly 340 million people within its borders. It's the third biggest nation on earth after China and India in population. And it's the fourth biggest after Russia, Canada, and China in land size. But by a very small margin, we're just barely smaller than China. I think if China lost the Aksai Chin region, which is a little region they conquered and took over from India, I think if Aksai Chin was gone, then I think that we would be basically a little bit bigger than China. But because China has Aksai Chin, they're a little tiny bit bigger. It's very close. It's very close. It's not really off by that much. But anyways, in a land this big, this vast, this populated and well armed, with the disintegration of the woke military and the security forces in general, you would literally see a situation like Assad in Syria, the Assad regime. Assad is a Ba'ath Party ruler. Like, his regime is a secular humanist regime. It's the Ba'ath Party, which is pro-Arab nationalism, and it's pro-Arab socialism. So it's not a religious-oriented regime, and it's not a republic. It's not democratic. It's not any of those things. It's a secular humanist regime. And I explained that when I talked about Saddam's regime in Iraq, who was also a Ba'ath Party ruler who ruled Iraq right before the Iran-Iraq war started. In fact, that was one of the first things he did when he came into power, is he made war on Iran, because Iran had Ayatollah Khomeini seize power in the Islamic Revolution in the late 70s, in 1979. So the first thing Iraq did was take advantage of the turmoil in neighboring Iran, and they invaded. And their invasion sort of went a little bit decent at first, but then it turned on them because Iran, even though their military was in shambles, they were somehow able to pull it together enough to where they were able to recruit huge militia forces and use them in human wave assaults until their military could sort of get back on its feet and compete with Iraq, who by that point had a lot of support from many, many nations sending them weapons. But that's what saddled Iraq with a whole bunch of debt, which is partially why they invaded Kuwait later in 1990 after their long war with Iran ended. And it ended in a stalemate, because the only thing that saved Saddam really was his chemical weapons. Because in one day, he killed 1/5 of the entire Iranian military with VX nerve agent on the Al-Faw Peninsula. And that's where all the helmets of the dead Iranians came from, was largely from that Al-Faw gassing when they went and collected the dead and their helmets and everything they had with them. They basically used those helmets as decorations for Saddam's cross scimitar arms in the parade field in Baghdad by the presidential palace. He had the helmets cascade out of each side of the arms that were holding the scimitars, which is a really gruesome, ugly thing to do, but it's like glorifying the death of all the Iranians they gassed. But yeah, basically, you have that. So the societal rot, you see all of this. Oh, hey, Carly, great to see you. Yeah, you see all this stuff going on, and you see that basically, uh, there's a lot of overreach going on, agitation propaganda, false flags, because, look, they're setting up these riots to be a false flag, a sort of thing that they think they're going to be able to control because they have these woke tards that they actually do control a lot of. They control the leadership of these like BLM and Antifa type groups, but they're decentralized groups, meaning that the people at the bottom level, on the street level, are not in any way organized. So when these things spiral out of control, what the regime is looking to do is, just like in my scenarios. Oh, old Chad was right again. It looks like. I'm not saying for sure, but the way I had it in my hypothetical was that the regime, being that they were low on fuel, low on logistics, low on spare parts, low on POL products for the vehicles and spare parts, low on everything, low on food, fuel, munitions, being that the regime was low on so many things, what they had hoped to do was do false flags, create riots, and be able to crack down in just a couple places that they were small for a nation this vast, and they cannot occupy it all at the same time. It's impossible. I'm sorry, but 2.2 million that's spread around the world too. They can't even bring them all home to if something did happen here. So like, let's say that you have like 1.7 million that are still here, or 1.8 million maybe. Look, 1.8 million is not anywhere near big enough to hold a place this vast down, especially when they've run out of key resources and fuel. And I'm going to go over the fuel thing in just a minute. I'm gonna throw you guys a curveball here. I'm gonna show you some stats on the fuel, which you all might find very, very interesting, because I sure did. It really puts a lot of things into perspective, into the correct perspective, insofar as like what the military is even capable of and not capable of, and what's going to happen, and how this place is going to spiral out of control and disintegrate even further. So yeah, you're going to have also a financial and economic collapse coupled with all this stuff. Can you even imagine? Can you fathom what that would be like to have a food and fuel collapse, an economic and financial collapse? Because look, with the Fed trying to raise interest rates, guess what they're going to do? They're going to collapse the whole bond market, which is going to rip our economy and our financial system into shreds. The dollar's just going to get even more out of control. So when the bond market collapses, our economy is going to go with it. It's all going to tank, because the financial system and economic system in this country are very, very, very closely tied together. Being that a lot of the stock market is funny money, but all the investments is what keeps a lot of the businesses that we still have left even going. So if the bond market collapses and rips the whole stock exchange down with all its investments included in that, guess what? The economy's over. It's done. You're not going to have people going to work anymore because they ain't going to make nothing. Yeah, I mean, people ain't going to work free. I mean, think about it. This whole place is going to spiral into chaos like we've never even known or imagined. So my scenarios are not really that far-fetched at all, especially when you hear more of what I'm about to tell you. So, okay, while these riots, civil unrest, false flags, and overreach and agitation propaganda, and societal, moral, and ethical decay and rot, food and fuel shortages, and everything else is going on, guess what's happening in the background? Do you know what's happening in the background? Guess what? In the background, guess who's watching? Quiet observers everywhere. This nation has 340 odd million people within its borders. It would be very naive of me or anyone else to think that among 340 million people that there's not a bunch of dangerous people out there lurking in the shadows. And I'm not even just talking about foreign Trojan horse shock armies. I'm talking about people right here in America There's dangerous Americans that are lurking in the shadows, that are waiting, that have been waiting for their time. Because guess what's going to happen? When this place collapses and spirals out of control, there's going to be a power vacuum since the regime is not big enough to hold everything down. Just like in my scenario, how I mentioned that they were only able to hold down certain key areas that took to the globalist programming really well. Well, guess what? It's going to be the same thing in real life. Why do you think that I made those documentaries? I made those to show people what it's going to be like. It will be like Syria. It will be like Yugoslavia. It will be like African civil conflicts, all mixed together into one. You know, it will. It really will. So, taking all that into consideration, oh yeah, Soros, he's going to have a sore ass because in America, when everything collapses, these elites will be in hiding. They will be in hiding because their whole entire plan will backfire on them badly. They cannot control all the factions and groups and little militaries that will arise out of a national collapse during a power vacuum where the regime is not able to hold on to much territory whatsoever at all. They're going to, these factions, like I put in my docuseries, look, they're going to, these factions are going to come out and they're going to start taking control of large swathes of territory because they're going to have loyal militias all banding together behind them. You know, just like I show in my documentary when I read the story and I mentioned how these things can happen. That is not only plausible, it is extremely realistic. It's hyper realistic because if you think about it, you're going to have cults, like real religious cults and kooks of every stripe coming out. Then you're going to have, you know, they're going to be corrupting mainstream religions, okay? Because they're going to do things like how the Mormon state did things in my docuseries. They're going to convince people that it's the end of the world and that they're trying to bring in like a millennial kingdom or whatever weird, you know, things they're going to make up. You know, I mean, pick one, choose one. You're going to have religious kooks of every type coming out and banding together and doing crazy things like everyday things you see in the Middle East. It's going to happen here. It's going to happen here. Think about it. Just think about it. Like, imagine about 100,000 Kaczynskis or 100,000 McVeighs or like whatever. Imagine 100,000 Syrian like type of is people, and you know what I mean by is. It's a 4-letter group. So imagine that being commonplace here, because you're going to have different factions conducting assassinations, car munitioning, suicide munitioning with trucks, or even just individuals. You're going to have stuff like that happening because you're going to have that type of thing. There are real psychopaths waiting in the wings to do these types of things. Believe it. It's real. It's reality. Crazy, psychotic people are waiting to fill a power vacuum when this nation collapses. Just like the National Salvation Revolutionary Front did. They used their ham radio operators to spread their messages, and they spread very quickly and fast. Their group ended up taking over humongous parts of the United States, and they were very big and very dangerous. Same with the Mormon state. Although they were sort of just concentrated in the Southwest, they did similar, and they were able to spread their religious into the world sermons and get people radicalized and on board, and then they were able to conquer a large territory in the Southwest. Then you're going to have like your narco gangs and narco terrorists coming up from Central and South America who will establish themselves, sort of like the La Raza narco state. The La Raza narco state that I put in the map. Yeah, they had that small turf in New Mexico, but they were a very dangerous faction. Very dangerous. They were comprised of like Los Zetas and Zetas, however you say it, and MS-13 and all sorts of narco gangs and prison gangs. They're going to be very dangerous, very dangerous. And also, you're going to have the regime who's already evil. They're already evil, but they're going to be losing their grip on power. So you're going to see them doing crazy things because of that, because they're losing their grip on power, because they have to compete then with all these other factions, like Assad had to compete with all the rival factions in Syria. It's the same concept, but here in a much, much, much bigger nation, much, much, much bigger land mass. You're going to have exactly like what happened in Yugoslavia, Syria, occurring here. Even Afghanistan or Iraq or Africa, it's going to happen here. America's not special, okay? It's absolutely. What faction would I be a part of? I would be neutral. I would be defending myself because even on my map, guess what? I featured neutral areas that are just communities trying to defend themselves, and they're not aligned with any group or factions. Yeah, I saw you, Armored Saint. That was a funny comment. I had to answer that. That was cool. But no, I would be defensive. Only strictly defensive. I would never go out looking for people. Anyone that was around me, I would defend them because you do not want to be part of those factions because they're going to be out there butchering each other. You're not going to have a very long lifespan if you join up with one of them because, I'm going to get even further in depth with it, like the is type of groups. You're also going to have, look, there's 7 million combat veterans in America, 7 million from the two most recent wars. I'm not counting wars before that. I'm just talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm one of those 7 million combat vets, but you also have 20 million additional veterans from the old military, not the new military, not the woke military. I'm talking about the old professional military. You have 20 million or so odd veterans from the old military that had the training but didn't experience combat. So they're still combat effective, meaning that they could actually participate in any type of hostilities if they wanted to click up with different groups. And then you have the 7 million combat veterans. And I'd say out of that, maybe about 5 million of them are combat effective because you got 2 million that are like amputees and they're not capable of shouldering a weapon anymore and going out to fight. But, you would have maybe about 5 million of them. So let's just say 25 million total veterans, both combat and also the trained but non-combat ones, and like your support units and everything else. And then you've got 30 million hunters. 30 million hunters, people that lay in tree stands or perch up in the woods and snipe game, four-legged game. Now, they could easily switch from hunting four-legged game to two-legged game. Now, I wouldn't call them snipers, per se, because they don't have that type of training, but I would call them sharpshooters. You would have sharpshooters that would be derived from the large hunting community of 30 million hunters. So then, on top of that, then you figure in you have gangs, you have violent street gangs, then you have other types of gangs, you have lone wolves, and a lone wolf is like a single ideologue or a single brainwashed type of terrorist who's willing to go out and conduct their own types of things that are not, necessarily, I mean, they could be affiliated with a group, but they might not necessarily be 100% in, if you know what I mean. Like, they might make their own plans and conduct their own things. You have to figure all these things in when you look at this country and how it's disintegrating. Now, can you imagine all of those? Oh, and I forgot, hackers and anarchists, like violent anarchists and hackers, and also like computer hackers, also technical experts, engineers, all that stuff. All those types of people that I just mentioned, every single solitary type of person would be involved in a situation where this nation collapsed, okay? Then you're going to have woke militias that are organized by the government, the regime, because they're going to be losing their grip on power. So they're going to need manpower because their military is going to disintegrate and break apart. That's going to be a part of it. The military is going to break up and disintegrate, and it's going to, the members of it, maybe even entire units, are going to defect. And by defect, I mean they're going to defect and join other groups. So they're going to take all their equipment with them. They're going to take it with them. They're going to take other groups. They're going to strengthen other groups by the equipment and the extra manpower. So then when the woke militia, the militias have to be raised up, they're going to be combined with what's left of the armed forces for the regime, and also with the paramilitary, which are like your alphabet thugs. They're all going to be the regime forces, okay? And then you're going to have like foreign volunteers, which are like the third world foreigners that were flown in from like Sudan and Somalia and Afghanistan and all these other places, like the refugees that we took in. You're going to have the regime literally going into these refugee centers and trying to recruit men from them who have like really no experience or discipline whatsoever, but they're going to try and cobble them together into like volunteer brigades or whatever, or battalions even, maybe if it's smaller than a brigade or a regiment. They're going to cobble them together into like volunteer battalions of foreign volunteers. So you're going to have woke-tard militias, foreign volunteers, what's left of the woke military that stayed true to the regime. And that'll mostly be like the ones that stay true to the regime will mostly be like your types of people that swing both ways and don't know what bathroom to use, because the regime has been very accommodating to them and their ways. The rest of the military that will defect will be like your National Guard and reservists from like local communities that aren't like full-time military. Because of their being local, they're going to have more of a sympathy for wherever they came from, under whatever faction that it's under. So when this power vacuum occurs, because these riots, when they happen, just like in my story for my scenario origins, just like when the riots and stuff are going on, the regime has its own plans to do the Great Reset, but that's all going to backfire because they don't have their logistics or resources to be able to hold everything down. They just don't have it. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to crack down on a couple places. They're only big enough to hold down a few key cities, okay? That's all they can do. They're not big enough to hold down the whole country. It's impossible. It's impossible. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the professional manpower because they're woke, most of them. And I'm talking about like the active duty military more than even the reserves and the National Guardsmen. So look, you're going to have an unprofessional, undisciplined, uncohesive plies. So what about groups like Blackwater? What about them? I mean, you know, what of it? I mean, they're not that big either. I mean, they wouldn't make much of a difference in a situation where the entire country's collapsed. I mean, the regime isn't going to have the money to hire groups like Blackwater because they're still going to be using their collapsed currency. And guess what? Their gold is gone. Fort Knox is basically empty for all intents and purposes. The figures and stats say that we have 800 tons of gold. China has 6,400 tons of gold, and people think they have even more than that, but that's what they report. We have 800 tons of gold, but I don't even think those reports are right because I think most of it was stolen in the biggest gold heist ever committed on that certain day back in the year of 01. If you all know what I'm talking about. That was the biggest gold heist ever. And most of that's probably in Europe, with the elites in Europe. So anyway, America as a nation state probably doesn't even have 800 tons of gold left. But there, I mean, unless you're talking about like Texas, who has their own gold depository, which sets them up for success if they were to succeed, like in my scenario, because that $1 billion of gold that's worth $1 billion now in collapsed fiat money, it'll be worth a whole hell of a lot more than that. So Texas could introduce feasibly a gold-backed currency, and the in today's money of gold would be worth a whole hell of a lot in a nation that would be like 26, 27 million people, which is what Texas would be if it seceded. So think about it. Texas also has barges. The reserve naval fleet that's off of Beaumont with all the barges and oil tankers and cargo ships, guess what? Texas would take those and use it to, like they did in my scenario, to help their ally Florida. They helped Florida by sending them oil. And Florida returned the favor by sending Texas food, because Florida does grow a lot of fruits and other things that are necessary to live off of, because you need to have citrus fruits to avoid scurvy, and also it's full of vitamin C and D that can help with other issues. So all the Florida oranges and all the pecans and everything else that Florida grows, peanuts, those would be vital in a situation where there's a food collapse. And they could feasibly send it by sea, because Texas would at least have enough oil that they could fuel their barges and to deliver food, their cargo ships and their oil tankers. Because Texas, if it's seceded, even though that our oil production has gone way, 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 way down from what the 2017 numbers said, Texas, if it left, would still be able to produce just enough, because they also have refineries. They can refine the oil that they produce right here in Texas, because I live in Texas. So they could refine that, and they would have just enough to where they could actually conduct limited military operations and like subsistence trade. By subsistence trade, I mean conduct just enough trade to where they could survive. To where they could survive. It would just be just enough. Texas though, like if an internal conflict happened and Texas did leave, Texas would have to use every drop of fuel for subsistence trading and also for their limited military operations. Cars would not be driving. Cars would not be driving if Texas left and was in an internal conflict. There would be no cars on the road in Texas, much like everywhere else in the nation. But at least Texas would have enough fuel to do the bare minimum of survival, existence, subsistence, trading, and military operations. Because Texas has a military force like its Guard and its Air Fleet for its air guard, and also any reserve units that would defect and join Texas. Texas, and maybe some active duty too. Texas would have just enough fuel to where they could do the bare bones minimum of operations. And by that I mean they could only fly a couple planes at like one time in a situation like that, much like everywhere else that would find themselves having an air force, but much of it would stay on the ground, because in an internal conflict, guess what? The military-industrial complex stops. Nothing else is being produced. So you would have to conduct operations off of whatever stockpiles you had available. And guess what? In a situation where spare parts are no longer produced, new engines are no longer produced, guess what you have to do? You have to cannibalize other vehicles. You have to take working parts out of other vehicles to repair aircraft, tanks, Bradleys, whatever you end up with as a force. You would have to cannibalize vehicles just to keep your other vehicles running. And guess what? Eventually you would run out of vehicles over a long period of time because of all the cannibalizing for parts. So in an internal conflict, everything will disintegrate. The military, even the factions, even their capabilities to make war over time will disintegrate as they run out of ammo, as the stocks run dry, as everything runs dry, the spare parts, the oil, everything will run dry eventually. So guess what? Basically that means that by the end of the internal conflict, there's going to be hardly anything left, because all the stocks will be near depleted. So everything in an internal conflict used by all these different factions would have to be used very, 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 very sparingly. Very sparingly. Meaning very few aircraft flying. Meaning a bare minimum of mechanized units operating. And they wouldn't operate very far from where their bases would be. And that even goes for the factions that end up with mechanized formations at their disposal. They would only be able to use them in a very limited number and a very limited capacity. And my battles that I created, my battle maps for my next scenario video, it illustrates all of that perfectly. perfectly. You will all see exactly what I'm talking about when I do my documentary. It's tomorrow. It's tomorrow now. So I'm going to be doing it tomorrow. The maps, and the scenario script. I have to read a little bit of a script first, but then I move on to the maps, and then in the same video. And I will also, you saw Colonel McGregor there, one of the Troika leaders of the NSRF, National Salvation Revolutionary Front. He has a different icon than Alfred Motufu, who is the head of the propaganda, the policy, and the political decisions. He's also in charge of the paramilitary death squads, which is why he has the Jolly Roger Death Brigades emblem. But the Colonel McGregor, has the NSRF regular emblem because he's in charge of the overall military forces, like the core forces, which are the defected military units that defected to the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, and all the combat veterans that joined those units into an amalgamation of core forces. And then there's the regular militias, which make up the bulk of the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, since obviously there's limited military units that could only be spread around. So yeah, like back to the Blackwater thing. Blackwater could be hired by anybody that had gold or precious metals, and the regime would not be able to hire them for a very long period if they were the ones trying to hire them. You might see other factions hiring somebody like Blackwater, but Blackwater's not that big. They're really not that big. So overall, if they were hired, it would only be for like a limited offensive or something like that, to where they would be like a filler unit or something, or provide security for like logistical trains or whatever, what have you, because even though these factions like the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, on paper, they're very big, but when you think about it, due to logistics and transportation issues and having such a large swathe of territory, they can only conduct very limited offensives. Even with the huge size of their forces being 5 million, they can only conduct very limited offensives, like in the tens of thousands. And why is that? Because you have to transport these people. I mean, otherwise they have to march all the way to battle, like in the original Civil War. And that would take forever to get them to a battle. So it would be predominantly local forces conducting offensives in key areas. The rest of the forces would basically sit wherever they materialized, unless they're going to march to battle, because on paper, nominally, in name only, the NSRF has these huge forces. They have 5 million forces, but they all can't go to battle at the same time or be concentrated in one area or a few areas at once because of the transportation and fuel issues. They're basically stuck wherever they materialized. So, they can go very, very limited distances from where they materialized, unless it's like a few small units that somehow were able to be transported, like by train, and there's very limited diesel for train transport. And that even goes for the regime forces. The regime would, and I told you all this in my impromptu live, for the regime units to go places, they would have to put their units, like their tanks and Bradleys and all their heavy vehicles, on flatbed train cars to transport them a long distance. And how are they going to do that in some internal conflict where the railroad system is destroyed or damaged, or where they're under withering firepower? You can't unload vehicles off of a train if you're under attack from mortars or from rocket artillery or howitzer artillery or whatever. You cannot unload units off of train cars like that. I mean, come on now. Thank you, Ken. I'm glad to see you here. Welcome, my friend. Welcome. Ken's awesome. Please go over to his channel too. His channel is called Weathered. Ken is one of the best people I know on YouTube. He's very, very, very good. Just overall, he has really good assessments on things. Just check him out if you're interested. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Logistics and transportation is very, very prominent in war. You cannot, like I said before, armies just can't get up and do, like the word do, D-O. Armies just can't get up and just do. They have to be transported. They have to have a method of transport. because tanks aren't going to drive for hundreds and hundreds of miles and throw track or, because tanks and heavily armored vehicles can throw track. And putting a track back on a vehicle is a nightmare. When I was in field artillery, guess what? We were on the M109 Paladins, the M109A6, which is our field howitzer, and it was on a tracked chassis, meaning that it was a tracked vehicle that looked like a tank, but it wasn't a tank. It was a howitzer on a chassis, on a tracked chassis. And guess what happened? When those tracks got thrown, guess who had to put them back on? The crew. The crew. You have to use like an ice pick and a bunch of other things, and it's a nightmare to put those tracks back on the vehicle. It really is. Imagine throwing track in mud or in some other situation where it's nearly impossible to be able to put the track back on that vehicle. That's why you see train transport of armored columns. Like you see like a whole brigade will put its vehicles, every vehicle a brigade has, they have to load them on a train if they're going to go for a long distance. They're not going to drive their tanks on roads or anywhere else and throw track unless it's in like a battle. And in a battle, it's a whole different ball game, because in battle, that's when they're actually doing their maneuvers and everything else. And if they throw track in battle, oh boy, that's even worse of a nightmare to have to even try to put a track back on in a middle of a combat situation where your crew could get shot up or whatever else. That vehicle's basically toast if it throws track in battle, and it's a battle of maneuver with like a real enemy like China or Russia. Because think about it. If it's a tank on tank situation, and that longer range Ch1na L7 copy, the Type 83 gun that's on the older Type 59s, 69s, and 79s. And that's the older tanks. I'm not even talking about their best tanks, like their two best tanks, which are the Type 96 and Type 99. The Type 96B and Type 99A are two of China's best tanks. The 96 is a whole different tank from the 99. You can tell by looking at the pictures of them. There's subtle differences. Even though the turret looks similar, they're very different tanks. But they're both very advanced tanks. But even the older upgraded Chi-Com tanks with the longer range L7 copy that they improved on and made capable with the bore of firing anti-tank guided missiles from it, even their depleted uranium shells or their tungsten sabot rounds, imagine a sabot round crashing into a track and destroying the track. You're never going to be able to put that track on in battle. If your track got hit by a tank shell like a sabot round, that tank is out of commission. And guess what happens next? If that crew doesn't bail out of that tank, they're dead. They're dead. In a real battle maneuver, they're dead. You see, when we fought Iraq, we didn't really fight battles of maneuver there because the Iraqis didn't use their tanks in a correct manner. Because had they used their tanks correctly and used them in battles of maneuver, they could have equally destroyed as many of our tanks as we did theirs. Oh yeah, because the tanks that exist today and that have existed at least since, the 90s, they're all equally capable of destroying each other when it comes to battles of maneuver. And by battles of maneuver, I mean where they're constantly moving and shooting, and they're flanking each other, then counter-flanking each other, and getting behind each other, and all the other maneuvers that they do in warfare. But the Iraqis didn't really fight a battle maneuver. They used their tanks as artillery pieces, or actual like bunkers where they just put sand bars around their tanks and use that as like a fortification, and they got destroyed doing that anyway because they weren't moving and shooting. And they used some tanks as decoys too, which was just so they could get a bead on our tanks as soon as they fired at the decoy. But that still didn't work because the tanks that were set to fire on ours were in placed positions, which is stupid. Saddam Hussein should have never meddled in military affairs because he wasn't a very good tactician. Saddam Hussein was a better thug than a tactician, if you read about his history, his personal history. But anyways, back to the topics. So here's the deal. You have to move units, and you have to move them by flatbed truck or flatbed train if they're going a long distance. And our woke, depleted military cannot do that because trains run on diesel, and we're critically low on diesel. I mean, to the point to where they could only move a few small units that won't be able to do a damn thing in terms of the overall picture. So you're going to have these factions rising up to fill the power vacuum. Again, it's not the people out there making all the noise right now that you need to worry about. It's the people that are quietly sitting back and observing everything, waiting for their moment to arise, that you need to worry about. Just like in my story reading of my first hypothetical video for my entire documentary, which will be a 4-video long documentary on the Second American internal conflict, Syrian style, meaning factions. So here's the deal. You have all of that going on, but in the background, as civil unrest and riots and unraveling of the economy and food and fuel system is going on, you have all these core leaderships of these different factions that are sitting back, waiting for their moment to arise. They know people that know people that know people. If you understand what I'm saying, it's very naive to think that the core leadership of these different factions doesn't know commanders of units that might go rogue when take their equipment with them, or they don't know various militia leaders, or they don't know various hackers and anarchists or whatever, what have you, or McVeigh type people. It's very naive to think that that's not going on or that that's not going to happen. Again, it's not the people that are making all the noise that you need to worry about. It's the people that are lurking in the shadows, in the background, waiting to fill the power vacuum. So whenever I tell you that the plans of the Western elites are going to backfire on them, that's what I'm talking about. Think about it. They are depleted and woke, and they're going to be even more depleted if units defect from them, like your guard and reserve units and such. They're going to be even more short on manpower, and they don't have the logistics or fuel capable of actually moving all these different units to so many places. And even if they could, America is so vast. It's so vast. It's so populated. There's so many people with firearms. There's so many veterans that are well-trained, very well-trained, even some with experience, like the 7 million I mentioned. And then from the old military, not the woke military, the old professional military, all the millions of hunters that can switch from 4-legged to 2-legged game, basically become sharpshooters. All of the crazy maniacs and kooks and fanatics and everybody with different ideologies, all lurking in the background, waiting to arise. Ham radio operators that'll spread and disseminate the propaganda of these different groups to get people to join them. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Why do you think in California that they tried to ban ham radios? Why do you think that was? I'll tell you why that was. Because they want California to be a firmly globalist state. They don't want different groups arising when they try to implement their takeover plans, which their takeover plans essentially in a nutshell is this. They're going to have riots. They're going to crack down in a couple big cities because that's all they can do. That's all they can do. They do not have the logistics and the personnel and the professional personnel and everything to do it everywhere. It's impossible. They cannot do it. I just explained to you on a tirade why they cannot do it. So here's the deal. They want a few key globalist areas where they can crack down in when all these riots that they created begin to happen and false flags that they created begin to happen. But guess what that's going to do everywhere else? It's going to piss off a lot of the wrong people. And by that, I mean it's going to piss off all the fanatics and religious cults and kooks, and and even the secular humanist fanatics and radicals, free radicals, all the lone wolves. Everybody's going to pounce as soon as this country's economy, food, and fuel system collapses. Everybody is going to pounce all at the same time, like I explained and diligently explained and even read in my hypothetical scenario, my story that I read, my origins story. And origins simply means the origins of the conflict, the origins of the factions, where they came from, how they arose. It's just like Syria. Just like how it happened in Syria and Yugoslavia and Afghanistan. Did you know Mullah Muhammad Omar, the Taliban ruler? He actually was dirt poor. He was a cleric who basically came from nothing and became the ruler of Afghanistan, and this is how he did it. During the Soviet-Afghan War, like I told you all before, the guy was a crack shot with a rocket-propelled grenade. The dude was taking out tanks left and right by himself with an RPG. And I'm talking about old tanks like the T-55s that the Soviets sent in because of the transmission and the torsion bar system and engine that it had and gearbox. Everything it had was more suited to Afghanistan than the newer T-72s they had at the time. So they used a lot of the older T-55s. So Mullah Omar was able to take out around 20 of those with a rocket-propelled grenade. And the dude is a religious nut, like a religious kook. And the legend goes, and this is true, this is actually true, the legend goes that Mullah Omar had a dream one night, and an angel told him that they needed his help in Afghanistan. So he went to Afghanistan. He joined up with a group that was already there fighting the Soviets. Then he created his own group, but then he disbanded, and then he went and started a religious school. He started a madras of his own. And he began to spread his own brand of Islam. And what happened was, as these students proliferated, they went out from his madras. They went and started their own madrasas and continued to spread Mullah Muhammad Omar's ideology. Look what an idea can do. All it takes is an idea. An idea. Anyone with an ideology, an idea, can spread it. And some spread like wildfire, like the Taliban. The word Taliban means students in Pashto, students. So the religious students of Mullah Muhammad Omar spread his brand of Islam across Afghanistan, mostly in the south. And then when Najibullah was the communist ruler of Afghanistan, see, after the Soviets left Afghanistan, there was a power vacuum. Just like what I'm talking about that'll happen here when the economy crashes and the riots and everything and the civil unrest spreads out of control. There was a power vacuum. Well, there was one in Afghanistan, and Najibullah's communist regime was barely holding on to power because when the Soviet Union left, who were his supporters, he was on his own. It's like, later, dude, you're on your own, man. Try to hold it together. Peace. You know, I mean, the Russians just left him to himself, and he had to fight off all these different groups, all these factions, again, talking about factions that waited in the shadows. All these factions arose to challenge Najibullah's communist regime, and guess what? Mullah Muhammad Omar became one of the biggest factions. His Taliban, his students, and his religious students took up arms and became fanatics, and they rode into battle and destroyed Najibullah and took control of Afghanistan. So that's basically what can happen in a nutshell. All it takes is an idea being spread. So think about it. All these factions coming up, all these factions, they have their own ideas, their own ideologies, and they're going to spread because there's going to be a power vacuum. So here's the deal with the fuel. I told you all I would get to this. When looking at the fuel situation for the United States, there's a lot of conflicting statistics out there, but that's what made me do even deeper research, and upon doing deeper research, this is what I found out. A lot of the half-baked statistics that you see on the fuel thing is simply this. They come from earlier times, and what they did, and by earlier times, I mean previous years, and what they did was they not only included the oil that we produce domestically, but they also included the oil that came from Canada that we refined here in our refineries. So basically, it's cheating. It's cheating. These people try to use these half-baked statistics to make us look better than what we really are. So here's the reality from their own mouths of the Energy Information Administration. In 2021, this is the oil that we actually produced in the United States. It was 4,082,478,000 barrels. In that year, in the year of 2021. And guess what they tried to say we were producing at our peak in 2017? They tried to say we produced 18 billion, but we didn't produce 18 billion because most of that was refined from Canada and other nations. So Now we've hit a low. Now this is what's really going to blow your mind. So essentially, in a nutshell, just to round it, just to round the numbers up, here's the deal. We produced 4 billion in the United States in 2021, and it's probably less this year. And here's the thing that's going to blow your mind, like I told you. Here's the military consumption of fuel. In every year, our military consumes 4,599,000,000 barrels of oil in it per year. And look at the figures I just told you about what we produce. It was 4 billion. So if the military uses over 4 billion per year, then, and the United States as a whole uses even more, the United States consumes tons of fuel. It's insane the amount of fuel we consume. So the United States as a whole, hold on. But as a whole, the United States consumes 3.2 billion barrels per year. Yeah. So you take that and the military consumption and add it together, and we're importing a lot of fuel. Lots of fuel. So that means that as we deplete our strategic reserve, which is there for military use or emergency use only, as we sell it on the open market, as we see the European Union, guess what that means? That means that we're about to have a massive fuel crisis. Did you all see my video when I predicted by the end of summer, roughly, that we would have the food and fuel collapse where it would be bone dry? Did you all see my video where I predicted by August that would happen? Well, guess what? We're not even out of June yet, and look what's happening. So, and I predicted that sometime in July, Ukraine would collapse too, but I'll get to that because I told you that's part of my topics for a little later. But anyhow, the whole situation, we have some, I had that wrote down too. Hold on. We have like 511 million barrels or something in the strategic reserve, I believe. Yeah, 511 million barrels. So it's depleting quick. It's depleting very quick. And with the amount of fuel we consume in a day as a nation and our military, we're not going to have anything left. We're not going to have nothing left. There's so many statistics out there on this stuff. So basically, the deal is this, is that, you know, you have to look at the margin of error, and the way that I figured out what was going on with the conflicting statistics is you look at the margin of error, and then you investigate the margin of error and what can cause such a vast margin of error. And the things that cause it is that they count the amount of fuel we refine from other nations as fuel that we produce when it's in fact not. It's not. Because when you go to their own mouths, their own sources, official sources, and you see what we really produce, yeah, all the other stuff is propaganda. It's hype. It's made up. It's pretend. The Soviet Union did the same things that we're doing before it collapsed. They use fake statistics, fake half-baked statistics to try to prop up their system when in fact it's actually incorrect, because when you look at the official statistics, they're much less than the hyped up statistics. And they hype up statistics like they did with the flu numbers, relabeling the flu into a certain thing. You know what I'm talking about. They made up fake statistics by using the flu numbers to be a number for something else that happened 2 years ago. So there we go. More fake statistics. You have to always investigate statistics, which is something I do on a regular day. I'm a math nerd. I'm just a nerd, period. I'm a nerd in general because I devote all my time to nerdy pursuits. like making you guys documentaries and showing you every angle of these things and why that's the case. I show you all the angles of these things, all the angles. And I kick narratives in the balls because narratives need to be punted. They need to be punted because there's so many false narratives out there. You literally have to investigate everything. Literally every single solitary thing you see that gets mentioned. You have to remember that Smith-Munt is no longer in effect, so they can propagandize the entire American population. And when their propaganda filters into the alternative media, that's when you have to be very, very, very careful, because there's a lot of angles to all these things. So I try to punt kick these narratives in the nuts because I'm tired of them. Because I'm seeing a lot of people falling for things that are just not correct. And I'm not talking about, anybody by name. I'm just talking about in general. Look at everybody. Look around you. Look at all the people falling for so many things. You have to remind people to be skeptical, to be highly skeptical. It's like, I had a friend of mine, for instance, send me a video last night, and guess what the video was? It was of a cart being rolled out of the presidential residence, and you know what building I'm talking about when I say the presidential residence. They were rolling a cart out with what looked like a body bag on it. But then I told this person that sent me the video, I said, look, you have to be skeptical of everything. That might not be anything. It could just simply be them playing a prank on the entire world by rolling out a bag and saying, hey, let's roll out a bag on a cart that looks like a body bag and see how many people spread this misinformation. You have to think of all the angles of these things. There's so much nonsense out there. Think about it. You have to really think deeply on these things. And I mean, because they're trying to propagandize and agitate people and mislead people. That's a big part of it, because now I'm on my topic that I told you I would talk about of the role of Psyops in a post-Smith-Munt USA. And why being skeptical of everything is a must. You have to be skeptical of everything you see because they can propagandize us. And it's well known that they can. So what they're trying to do is they have layered psyops in different layers. They layer their psyops. They have layered psyops. And if you understand what layered psyops is, it's like 4D psyops. It's not just psyops in layers, but it's psyops that are actually blended into other psyops. It's like four-dimensional psychological operations. I don't know where they come up with all of them. They probably have a supercomputer telling them how to do these things. But what they do is they layer psyops upon psyops. But what they can't figure in is that the human mind, they have not been able to master the human mind. So here's the thing. The human mind is more dynamic than any AI in existence. And that's why their plans are going to backfire on them, because the human mind is very, very much independent from any type of AI system in existence. I mean, unless you took the mark of the beast and you became integrated with AI, but as long as you didn't take the mark, and there's still a humongous chunk of our population who didn't, they cannot master and map every single human's mind. They cannot do that. So what that relates to is the fact that there's going to be a breakdown, and there's going to be different factions because of all the lone wolves, all the anarchists, all the hunters and combat vets and regular vets, and all the hackers and specialists and technical experts that have sympathies for different groups, all the McVeighs there. They cannot control those people because there will be a power vacuum, just like I was saying earlier. And those factions that rise up are going to fill that power vacuum just the same as what happened in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Yugoslavia, everywhere in the world, Africa, Latin America. Any civil war that's ever happened was a result of a collapse in a power vacuum. Be it a collapse of a regime, be it a collapse of an economy, be it the collapse of the financial system, food system, what have you. Pick one, name one, choose. And guess what happens? They all are jockeying and vying for control and power over the nation. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. And guess what the end result of that is? We get weakened to such a degree. Look, China is already colossal, huge. They could already kick us all around the world. I mean, like literally, they could kick our ass all around the world. But here's the deal. We're going to be so weak after an internal conflict that when China pounds us into the dust, we aren't even going to be able to form an effective guerrilla response to the Chinese and Russian coalition invasion, because China and Russia are going to pound us into the dust and we will have nothing left with. I mean, it might as well be spit wads, whatever we have left, because we're not going to be able to take on the might of China or the might of even Russia, because even Russia by itself could kick our ass all around the by itself could kick our ass all around the battlefield. So the combined might of the colossal dragon known as, and a large bear, a colossal dragon and bear combo is gonna, kick our ass, and they're not going to give us kick our ass. And they're not going to give us any combination fried rice with it, because, they ain't going to be nice to us about it. So after an internal conflict where all these factions have jockeyed and vied for power, you're going to have it happen to where we get utterly annihilated in every single form, facet, and capability. We're not going to be able to respond to anything. Not a single thing. Not even, and if there's anybody that tries to, they're not going to be able to do nothing effectively. So you have to look at the role of Psyops that are leading into this collapse. The collapse that'll lead into a situation where the Western elites finally lose their grip on things, and they will. Oh yeah, they'll still control small areas. They'll control small areas, like all the woke-tard areas, all the areas that took to the globalism programming really well, like New Jersey, New York, Delaware, Maryland, and the coastal areas of the Northwest, like Washington coastal areas and Oregon coastal areas, and also California. The areas like that, and also the islands of like Detroit, tiny areas. I mean, yeah, they'll have a fairly large population in those areas, but because they're the biggest cities, and they're also the biggest state like California in population. Of course, they'll have a lot of people under their thumb because they'll control areas with big populations. But overall, in the grand scope of the land size, they're not going to control very much land, and territory control is what really matters. Not so much the people in a territory, it's the overall size of the territory. So like on my hypothetical map, you saw how the National Salvation Revolutionary Front is the biggest territory by far. They have the biggest armed forces with all the militias and the core forces that they got under their control, as well as their paramilitary, their brutal paramilitary that hacks off people's limbs and them up and guns them down and hangs them at mass hangings and everything else. Yeah, the National Salvation Secular Humanist Group, the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, ultranationalists, they're the ones with the biggest territory in terms of land size. But they also end up catching up with the regime in population. So the NSRF and the regime in the scenario are neck and neck in terms of population in my internal conflict scenario, but they're also but the NSRF is much bigger in landmass than any other faction. Of course, Texas is a big faction, Florida's a big faction, the Mormon state's a fairly big faction, but they're nowhere near the size of the NSRF. Because they recruited so many crazies and militias and everybody to do their bidding that were pro-American that ended up getting taken into a weird direction. And by that I mean they were like conservative-oriented people that ended up getting carried away, and they got influenced by the core leadership of this group, in like how Mullah Omar influenced his students. These core leadership group of the NSRF influenced all those militias and all those defecting military units of the Guard and reserves and all the paramilitary fanatics and hackers and anarchists. Everybody that was under their thumb, they influenced them to do their bidding, and their bidding was to murder as many people as they could that they felt were globalists or espoused globalist ideologies or globalist ways of any type. basically the regime and all its underlings. They wanted to butcher them, and they did. And they also butchered other factions too, because they felt other factions uh, uh, were not American enough to their liking, like the Mormon state and, of course, everybody else. The NSRF was enemies with virtually everybody, even though they had arms deals with the at the beginning with the La Raza narco state, who sold them a lot of weaponry acquired through South America that it actually ended up coming from Russia and China that was like surplus cheap weapons. They sent that through Latin America to the La Raza narco state, who in turn ended up doing an arms deal with the NSRF and sending them arms packages, who they then used to equip their paramilitary groups that were going around butchering everybody. So that's basically, things like that could happen, because if you think about it, China and Russia want to destabilize us. How better to destabilize us than sending us a bunch of cheap weapons that wouldn't make any overall difference in terms of like if they invaded us, but they would send just enough to where we could butcher each other with it? Think about it. China and Russia would love to destabilize us by doing things like that. So they're going to use groups like the La Raza narco state. So yeah, things like that will most certainly happen in an internal conflict, and that's going to be mentioned when I actually do the documentary. But anyway, the role of Psyops, back to that, Psyops are playing a key role in agitating people. Their goal, because you have to remember the regime, the globalist regime, and the uber-rich elites that control it, the wealthy elites that control the globalist regime, are trying to implement their Western Great Reset. Now, these are just the Western elites. They cannot do it everywhere, because Russia and China are the Eastern elites, and they have their own Eastern camp that has their own plans for the world. And their plan involves destroying and defeating the West, colonizing the West, taking and looting the West, and punishing the Western elites, because they see the Western elites as their rivals. But the Western elites are so stupid that they would rather tear down their own power base so that they could have their fourth industrial revolution, but which is ultimately going to fail because, for one, they cannot control the results of what they're putting into motion, because they don't believe in cause and effect. And I just went on a tirade explaining cause and effect throughout this entire live stream. This whole live stream has basically been a live stream on cause and effect. These Western elites don't believe in cause and effect. They think their plans are infallible. But guess what? These demonic creatures, these Western elites, these satanic elites, they're stupid, man. They're really stupid. They're arrogant and hubristic, and they haven't factored in all the factors that I went and diligently mentioned and why it's the case. Cause and effect has happened in every country that's ever had a collapse and an internal conflict. What makes America different? Nothing. Nothing. We ain't special. America's not special. The same thing's going to happen here that happened in every other conflict, that every other nation that had an internal conflict. A power vacuum will be created, and the plans of the elites will backfire on them horribly, horribly. In fact, I'm sure some of them will end up getting swept up and caught up in it, meaning that, certain things could happen. Because you got to understand, there's a lot of crazies out there that, have their own agenda against them too. So you got to understand. And I'm talking about like individual type of people. Justice might get served, but it'll be like street justice, if you know what I mean by street justice. So anyway, all those things can happen in an internal conflict. Good night, Ken. Hey, thanks for coming. But I'm going to get close to wrapping this up soon anyway, so I got 2 more topics left. So the Psyops are there to agitate. The Psyops are there to agitate. Never forget that. Now the Smith-Munt has been gone for a good while. They can agitate and inflame people, or they can influence people, or do all kinds of things to people. Like they're going to influence all these woke tards into having a riot over something, or they're going to do more false flags and then do psyops. And you know what I mean by other false flags, the types that they've been conducting with these mass types of events. You know what I'm talking about. They can influence people after events like that to try and do what they want them to do. But psyops don't always work according to plan because, again, you have other people out there that can do their own psyops and manipulate people in their own ways. So, yeah, backfiring can occur very easily. So, anyway, enough about the psyops in a post Smith-Munt environment. Let's go on to talk about how the China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, and hybrid warfare doctrines affect things. Look, China is massive. They're massive. I've told you all in virtually every live stream how massive they are. I don't need to go into it. You guys already know. If you don't know, please go back and watch all those live streams. China is a colossal, massive military superpower. They are and have been for at least the last 5 years. Industrially, they are a massive, colossal, industrial superpower that nobody even comes close to. No one. Nobody can touch China in steel production, the number of factories, armaments factories, shipyards. No one can touch China. Russia, they do have a decent amount of factories. They have more than we do. They can turn out more than we can. But they're not even near as close to as big as China. But still, Russia is bigger than we are. They have a bigger military and paramilitary than we have combined. So I'm talking about Russia's paramilitary, active, and reserve military combined. They have a bigger armed forces in general than we have combined. Nowhere near as big as China's. Nowhere even near it. Nowhere even close. But they're big. They're still a moderately sized big nation, and they're the second most powerful after China because they control much of the world's resources, a huge chunk of it, I should say. And they also control, and it's enough to where it makes a huge difference on the world stage what they control within their borders. And also, they have the biggest nuclear stockpiles. China is the third, but it's still enough for them to be the world superpower because they can wipe out two very big nations with the arsenal they have of about 1,000 nukes. And realistically, it is 1,000. It's not no little lowball estimate like 400. Remember, China's nukes are a state secret, but the amount of fissile material they had access to that's not a secret. They've had 20 tons of enriched weapons-grade uranium, and they've had 2 to 4 tons of plutonium, which is easily enough for 1,000 or more nukes. So we're going to go with the high median and say that they have 1,000, and that's enough to destroy 2 huge nations. So anyway, they're still the world superpower combined with all the other aspects. But anyway, the two of them, with their respective situations, China vis-a-vis Taiwan, Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. Okay, Russia and Ukraine was a limited incursion done by Russia, as I've explained before, limited incursion. And what they've been able to do is incredible. I mean, the feats that they've achieved with their tiny forces they send into Ukraine, it scared the hell out of NATO. You best believe it has. 70 battalions destroying the best European military besides Russia. It was the second best military apart from Russia as far as inside of Europe's borders. Ukraine had the second biggest and most capable military after Russia, and Russia crushed it with 70 battalions with minimal air support, and Russia's air forces are huge. They have the second biggest overall combat air fleet after China's combat air fleet. I'm not talking about support planes. I'm strictly talking about combat aircraft. Russia has the second biggest overall combat air fleet after China, and that's largely due to the quantity of strategic bombers Russia has, both in storage where they're maintained and both in their active armed forces. So, yeah, Russia has the biggest strategic bomber fleet of any nation, but the second biggest overall combat air fleet, because China, even though they have the second biggest strategic fighters and fighter bombers, it's huge. Tactical fighter bombers, like ground attack aircraft, and also fighters. China's fighter and fighter bomber air fleet is ginormous. It's 1,000 more than what we have, and I'm counting the 300 Q5s that are in storage and maintained in China as part of their air fleet. They also have a large naval aviation arm of some 410 planes. And Russia, they have Russia's 310. China has 440. I got the numbers mixed up. Anyway, the hybrid warfare doctrines, which both China and Russia employ hybrid war doctrines. Russia only used limited hybrid war doctrines in their invasion of Ukraine because it was only a limited incursion to begin with. It was not a full-scale invasion. I'm tired of people that think it's a full-scale invasion. It was not. It was a very tiny incursion. If you look at the actual overall number of forces involved, it was only 63 to 65,000 forces involved at any given moment on the Russian side. And then, of course, there's the proxy forces of the LPR and the DPR, which is the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, which each contributed some proxy armies that Russia equipped with some of their older tanks and equipment, like the T-64 M version tanks that they sent that were in the boneyards that they fixed up for them and sent. That were recently retired in 2015. So they weren't in the boneyards that long. So they fixed them up. They got the rust off of it, repainted them, and sent them to the LPR and DPR. And they did that with other vehicles too, older vehicles. So anyway, with the proxy forces and with the small Russian force of 70 battalions, they've got Ukraine on the ropes. They have Ukraine on the ropes, and it has NATO scared shitless. Has them scared shitless because very limited forces involved. Russia has ground down what inside of Ukraine's borders was a numerically superior force. Overall, Russia has a way bigger military than Ukraine, but because Russia only sent in a small force, they have ground down a numerically superior in the local area of Ukraine, just in the local area, a numerically superior force of 650,000 Ukrainian troops. That includes their paramilitary, their reserves, and their active duty forces. They ground it down to where it's basically now a light infantry force with very minimal artillery, tanks, and other heavy weapons. Very minimal. So we keep sending them stuff, and it keeps getting destroyed largely. Very little gets through. All the stuff they began the war with is gone. It's gone. It's gone. Russia destroyed all their tanks. They had 1,800 main battle tanks. 1,800 that were available for frontline service. Ukraine did. They're all gone. They're virtually all destroyed now. And Ukraine is using old men. So my prediction about their country collapsing by July, it looks to be coming true. It looks to be coming true. Again, there's a margin of error when I make predictions, but these were my personal predictions. These weren't anything I was telling anybody else to believe. These were things that I held as my own beliefs. I believed that Ukraine was going to collapse by sometime in July, and I believed that the food and fuel situation and economic situation would be dire. It would be dire come August. It would be dire. Well, my predictions are on the course to be proven correct. It's sure looking that way. It's really looking that way. Then, the hybrid war doctrines of China, you have to understand, China, they're being much bigger than Russia, having a much, much bigger navy. They're the biggest navy, most advanced navy on Earth, biggest subfleet and surface fleets on Earth, and the biggest paramilitary and military on Earth because of their reserves now being at 5 million and their active duty being 4 million and their paramilitary being 20 million. China doesn't have the problem of needing strategic flexibility like Russia did, because Russia has a huge territory it has to defend, which Russia is a gargantuan country in landmass. They have to defend the entire Arctic, the borders with NATO, the southern borders with Turkey, and the other nations down there, everything. So Russia needed strategic flexibility, which is why they did a limited incursion to begin with. But China doesn't have that problem because of all the personnel China has. China has so many personnel that even personnel they have spread around the world doesn't even scrape the barrel of what the overall sizes are of their forces that are available to them. So when China fully mobilizes all their paramilitary, all their reserves, everything, China is gargantuan. They're ginormous. So they're not going to have an issue with strategic flexibility when it comes to invading Taiwan. And I don't see them doing any limited incursion with Taiwan because, again, Taiwan is an island. It's an island. And Taiwan has certain options that Ukraine really didn't have. Taiwan has the option of destroying a certain dam in China that could flood a lot of the Yangtze River basin. So, yeah, they have missiles that are capable of reaching it. But China is not going to play games, and they're going to use hybrid warfare. They have to. They have to. If they're invading Taiwan, they have to. They have to go for those missile facilities and sites. They have to go for all the Taiwanese military installations. They have to do all that. So all their embedded forces inside Taiwan, I know they're there. They have to be there. They're going to invade. When they invade Taiwan, they're going to use Trojan horse shock forces inside Taiwan, just like I showed you they do here on my documentary. They're going to do the same thing in Taiwan. They're going to take out all those missile installations, military bases, air bases, everything like that is going to be taken out first. Then they're going to capture the cities. A close second. They're going to beach land, paradrop. Trojans are going to emerge. They're going to do all that stuff roughly all at the same time. They have to. They have to do it quickly. If they dilly-dally and play games and do a limited incursion and they just stick their toe in the water, so to speak, and they don't go all the way in, yeah, then they're going to have real issues capturing Taiwan. I don't see them doing it like that. I see it happening. Stupid things sometimes. They're like, you know, when you explain to them how well trained and how powerful, how huge, all the technology, everything that China has, they're like, oh, well, it's untested. Yeah, so was the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht was untested. Look at all they achieved in World War II. Germany became a world superpower and had a humongous empire that stretched from the Arctic all the way to the Libyan deserts of the Sahara, and then all the way from the coast of the Atlantic in France and Spain, and all the Pyrenees mountains in Spain and France, all the way to Moscow. So yeah, the Wehrmacht was untested. Look what all they were able to do. But they weren't the same as China. They didn't have the population, the industry. They didn't have all the stuff that China has, the level of technology. Guess what? China is superbly well trained. And China does have some battle experience, by the way, for those that say they don't. China has had their limited invasion of Vietnam back in the late 70s. They also had, border wars with India. They've also had limited combat with India in the basically the what's that area called, Kashmir, because China, Pakistan, and India are all in Kashmir, and they've all had sporadic battles with each other in Kashmir. So a lot of the Chinese units that rotated through there got combat experience with small unit type of combat. And then you had the People Armed Police, which is the brutally fanatical paramilitary unit that's fanatically loyal to the CCP regime. So you had that. They get their combat experience training from low-level counterinsurgency operations that they have to fight against the We to the Gurs out in Xinjiang who try to rebel. And they burn down whole villages and everything with flamethrowers. And they kick down doors. They do all sorts of brutal stuff out there in the hinterlands of Xinjiang because there is a resistance out there among the We to the Gurs. But can you blame them? I mean, they're being put in concentration camps and everything else. They're being oppressed by a wicked, despotic, secular, humanist, police state, communist regime. I mean, China's evil. They're evil. I mean, they're brutalizing all these minorities in China. So the Chinese are going to have resistance, and they've gotten it from the We to the Gurs who try to rebel. So they put down those rebellions with the PAP units that get rotated through Xinjiang. So they have combat experience. It's not like that they've not ever been to war or conflicts or whatever. They have combat experience, and they have their new hybrid war doctrines to combine with their combat experience, meaning that they're combining of the Trojan horse concept, marrying the Trojan horse concept to the concept of blitzkrieg and combining that with new innovative technologies and all the experience that they've already acquired. They're going to marry all of that together, combine it all together, and they're going to astound the world when they start taking things over with how rapidly they're going to do it. Because hybrid warfare, there's no defense against it. None. Zero. Once your enemy has infiltrated your nation in sufficient numbers, it's too late. It's too late. You cannot turn it around. All the CCP properties in this country, with all the units just sitting there chilling, waiting for us to, have an internal conflict before they emerge. They're going to defend themselves and their properties, of course, while all this is going on. It's not like it's going to be hard for them to do that. They have better technology than a bunch of, rebel units with just small arms and sometimes, occasional heavy vehicles when they're able to be used, but they'll be so outnumbered by all the Chi-Coms, they're not going to have no chance against them. So really, the Chi-Com areas will be bypassed, and what few types of people do go near them are going to find out pretty quick that they're not capable of taking on these Chi. Falls apart. We're really far gone by that point. We're way far gone. And then it's only going to end up with us being invaded via the Trojan horse doctrines of China and Russia, because Chinese and Russian troops are inside the United States in huge numbers, at least 5 million spread throughout the country. And that's my best estimate when I look at all the different amounts of foreign students here and foreign quote unquote business owners that don't speak a lick of English, and foreign business people for small businesses. Well, I just said that, but anyway, also the just the other people that sneak in across the southern border that happen to be Chi-Com troops or Russian troops. I mean, they're coming in through ports. I mean, student visas, worker visas, you name it. They're here. There's at least 5 million of them in this country. And their allies, too. Some of their allies are among that number. And then there's 7 million externals ringing this country. Canada, Mexico, Bahamas, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Mexico, Cuba, Panama Canal Zone. They're all over the place. They're totally ringing us. And they're going to be the external component that races in to reinforce the Trojans already inside, already doing the heavy lifting, using new advanced technologies and concepts like cyber war and anti-satellite weapons and directed energy weapons and cloaked missiles, hypersonic missiles. All these types of weapon systems will be used, and then some, because we still don't know what else they're going to roll out. So, they're going to crush this nation really fast with their hybrid war doctrines. There's no defense against it. And then you have the internal conflict, how it would progress. Well, it progresses all the way till it ends with us being invaded, but there's going to be other areas of the world that are also going to descend into their own conflicts, regional conflicts. And our military that's spread throughout the world is going to be isolated in small pockets and destroyed by all of our enemies overseas, because we can't bring them home. They're going to be cut off from logistics. You have to think about it. When there's an internal conflict happening here and the regime is barely holding on for its life by a thread, they're not going to be able to send them any more logistics to their overseas bases. Those units are going to get stuck wherever they are. They're not going to be able to airlift enough of them back to make a difference. They're going to be stuck, and then they're going to get caught in these isolated pockets and eliminated group by group. That's how it'll be. So as our country descends into madness and collapse and then into an internal conflict, like I mentioned at the very beginning, as all those things are going on, other theaters will open up, like I've said before many times. I've said that before a lot in past videos. Other theaters will open up to where our forces, if they're in those areas, they'll get isolated and destroyed in little pockets. They won't be able to do much of anything because they won't have the logistics to back them. They'll be cut off. They're just going to be cut off from everything. And then you have other internal conflicts elsewhere in the world erupting. The whole world is going to be on fire. It's going to be a madhouse. We didn't start the fire. Like that. like Billy Joel. I know I got a lot of people, 80s people in here like me. This whole place is going to go mad. The country is going to go mad, and the world's going to go mad. I hope you really all enjoyed this show tonight. I know I've gone on for a while, and I'm basically done with it. I just want to talk to the audience here. See you all still in here. And, yep. Hey, Y-Fam. Didn't know you were in here. Great to see you. Okie Girl and Carly, Heather and Georgia, and Lady M, and Priscilla. Hey, Priscilla, I hadn't seen you in a long time. Hey, Mario, good to see you too, bro. Mary Flasha. Yep, good to see you. Let me see. Let me see. Who else? Who else? That's all I see. Oh wait, Roger Dodger and my beautiful Jennifer. Yep, that's everybody. Hey, well, thank you all for coming, man. This was a great live. I really enjoyed doing this, and see if there's anybody that has a quick question, go ahead and ask. I guess I have a few more minutes before my phone dies. I got a little bit of life in it. Yeah, Heather, they are here. They are definitely here. Like I've been ringing the warning bells of that forever. Like in my documentaries and basically in my prior short factoid and informational videos that I had, my shorter videos, and my docu series on the entire invasion scenario and just everything. And the reason I'm doing an internal conflict scenario, Syrian style, is because I feel I haven't devoted enough time to that, because I've devoted most of my time to warning about the foreign invasion. But now that I've already gotten the warnings out about the foreign invasion, now it's time to warn people about how to navigate through an internal conflict, which is why I'm making this docu-series, and it's going to turn out really good by the time it's over. It's going to be very, very, very detailed, every single aspect, every solitary aspect of it. So, yeah, I hope you feel better too, Carly. Yep, thank you all for coming. Stay safe, everybody. Yes, Jennifer, I love you, baby. Anybody have a question? Anybody? Any quick burning questions of anybody? Hey, Charlotte, I didn't see you in there. Welcome. Any quick questions? Just one. I'll answer one question. Okay, why, fam? Has the crazy catastrophic weather in China affected their military might? No, not at all, really. I mean, their military installations are usually built in solid ground. They have also good drainage systems, and just like our bases here, we have a lot of drainage canals in our bases too. Like Fort Hood had a bunch, and Fort Hood is built on solid ground, not on any fault lines. It's on good ground. The Chinese, when they build their bases, or they do it just like we do. They pick the best possible areas, unless it's like in Iraq where we pick shitty areas for bases, like in valleys and things like that. Like Mosul, like Fob Diamondback was basically in a valley. It was in the river valley of the Tigris River, and we were able to be sniped at and mortared, and it just depended. Just really at Mosul, a lot of times they would have to fly and look for people that tried to shoot at our down into the valley at our people, and also people that would lob mortars and go hide after they shot a few mortars at us. So they would that's what they would do. They would emerge and shoot a couple mortars and maybe walk like three of them in to try to hit something, and then they would run and hide their mortar tubes. Sometimes they have really interesting ways of hiding and camouflaging their mortar tubes. Like they would dig a hole in the ground and put the entire the entire mortar tube in the hole. So all they had to do is walk up and just casually drop one in and then walk away when they were done firing it. And it would just land on our installations, and nobody would notice. A couple times things like that were discovered, and that's why we learned of it. So they had really crazy ways of camouflaging their weapon systems that were around our forward operating bases and combat outposts too. So yeah, no, I don't think it affects the Chinese. I'm sure their bases are on higher ground and they're on solid ground. But yeah, I love all y'all. Y'all be blessed. Y'all have a great night, and thank you for coming.